The first 20 seconds of my second life began with a question no 13-year-old should ever have to answer. Who do you choose? A lawyer stood beside a hospital bed. My grandfather's body hadn't even been taken away yet. Across the room, my mother was crying. Beside her stood the man she swore was only a family friend. And on the table sat a black folder containing a fortune worth $80 million. In my first life, I chose my family. 3 years later, they abandoned me. 30 years after that, I died alone. Now I was back at the exact moment where everything started. And this time, I smiled. I choose the money. The silence that followed was worth reliving an entire lifetime for. My name is Adrian Hale. In my first life, I was a fool. 13 years old, I believed love was stronger than greed. I believed family would always remain family. I believed promises meant something. The universe spent 40 years proving me wrong. My grandfather, Victor Hale, had built one of the largest logistics companies in the country. He wasn't a billionaire, but he was wealthy enough that most people spent their entire lives trying to get close to him, including my mother, including her boyfriend, including half our extended family. When I was young, I couldn't see it. All I saw was a grandfather who taught me how to fish, a grandfather who secretly bought me ice cream before dinner, a grandfather who never missed my birthday. When I turned 13, he died unexpectedly from a heart attack. The entire family gathered at the hospital. Everyone cried. Everyone pretended to mourn. Everyone waited for the will. In my first life, I didn't understand that. Now I understood perfectly. The lawyer opened the black folder. His name was Charles Bennett. Grandfather trusted him more than anyone, including his own children, including my mother. Charles adjusted his glasses and read the will. Most assets would be divided among various charities and business partners. Then came the final section. The room suddenly became very quiet. To my grandson Adrian Hale, every eye turned toward me. I remembered this moment exactly. Even the smell of the hospital room. Even the ticking clock on the wall. Charles continued reading. Adrian may choose between 2 options. My mother stopped crying. Her tears vanished instantly. I noticed it this time. In my first life, I hadn't. Option 1. Charles looked directly at me. Remain under the guardianship of your mother. In that case, the inheritance will be transferred into a family trust jointly controlled by her until you reach adulthood. My mother's breathing quickened. Not from grief. From excitement. Option 2. Charles turned the page. Relinquish parental guardianship. The inheritance remains exclusively under Adrian's name and will be managed independently until he turns 21. The room froze. Exactly like before. The same expressions. The same shock. The same calculations happening behind everyone's eyes. My mother immediately rushed toward me. She dropped to her knees, wrapped her arms around me, and began sobbing. Adrian, sweetheart, you don't need money. I almost laughed. The performance was incredible. Academy Award worthy. If only I hadn't already seen the ending. We have each other. Her voice trembled. Mom will always protect you. Protect me? In my first life, that protection lasted less than a year. 9 months after receiving control of my inheritance, she married Gregory Stone. The man standing beside her right now. The man she claimed was only a friend. The man who moved into our house before my grandfather's grave marker was finished. The man who hated me. The man who spent years convincing my mother that I was an obstacle, an expense, a burden. Eventually she agreed. By 16, I was living in a tiny apartment. By 18, I was working construction. By 23, I was sleeping in my truck. By 43, I died from exhaustion after collapsing at a worksite. The last thing I remembered was rain. Cold rain hitting my face. Then darkness. And now, a second chance. I looked up at Gregory. Our eyes met. For one brief second, I saw panic. Not concern. Not sadness. Panic. He wanted that money. Maybe even more than my mother did. I gently removed her hands from my shoulders. The room watched. Waiting. Charles watched too. There was something unusual in his eyes. Hope. almost as if he wanted me to choose differently this time. Maybe grandfather had told him something. Maybe grandfather knew more than I realized. I took a deep breath, then spoke clearly. I choose option 2. The room exploded. My mother stood up so quickly she nearly fell. What? Her voice cracked. What did you say? I looked directly at her. No fear.
No hesitación. No tears.
I choose the inheritance. Her face turned white, then red, then white again. Adrian! The scream echoed through the room. Are you out of your mind? Several relatives began whispering. Some looked shocked. Others looked impressed. A few looked amused. Charles calmly closed the folder. The decision is legally binding. My mother grabbed my arm. Hard. Pain shot through my shoulder. Change your answer.
Isterte her.
This woman had spent decades ruining my first life. Yet, at this moment she still believed she could control me. Perhaps because she remembered the timid child I used to be. That child was gone. Dead for nearly 30 years. Let go. My voice remained calm. That seemed to frighten her more than anger would have. Charles stepped forward. You heard him. My mother's grip loosened. Not because she wanted to, because she had no choice. For the first time, I saw genuine hatred in her eyes. Not disappointment. Not sadness. Hatred. Good. Now the masks were finally coming off. After the meeting ended, most relatives left quickly. The inheritance decision became the only topic anyone cared about. Money always revealed people's true priorities. Charles drove me away from the hospital. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The city lights passed outside the window. Finally, he broke the silence. You've changed. I smiled faintly. People change. Not usually overnight. Fair point. I looked outside. In my first life, I never questioned why my grandfather created those two options. Now I did. Did he know? Charles glanced at me. Know what? About my mother. A long silence followed. Then he sighed. Victor wasn't a foolish man. That was all he said. But it was enough. My grandfather knew. Maybe not everything. But enough. Enough to create an escape route. An escape route I had ignored. A mistake I would never repeat. Charles brought me to his home. A large but modest house outside the city. Nothing extravagant. Nothing flashy. Very much like him. The next morning he showed me dozens of documents. Investment reports. Property holdings. Business assets. Everything connected to the inheritance. In my first life I knew nothing about money. Now I possessed 30 years of hindsight. I knew which industries would dominate, which companies would rise, which technologies would reshape the world. Not because I was a genius, because I had already lived through it. The advantage was almost unfair. Charles expected me to be overwhelmed. Instead, I spent hours reviewing every document. His surprise grew with every page I turned. Eventually, I pointed at 3 small companies. At the time, they were nearly unknown. Struggling startups. Barely surviving. Invest heavily in these. Charles frowned. You've heard of them?
No.
Then why? I smiled. Call it intuition. He looked unconvinced. Reasonably so. I was 13. Yet after studying me for several seconds, he nodded. That decision would eventually multiply the inheritance many hundreds of times. But that wasn't my goal. Not really. In my first life, survival consumed everything. Work, bills, debt, pain. I never had time to live. This time I wanted something different. Not revenge. Not power. Not status. Freedom. For the first time in either life, freedom felt possible. I had no idea that within months, my mother would begin fighting to reclaim control over me. I had no idea that powerful relatives were already plotting against the inheritance. And I definitely had no idea that somewhere in another city, a best-selling fantasy novel was about to change my life forever. Because that novel contained a character. A minor character. One who died before chapter 10. A character whose story I knew by heart. And somehow, that character was beginning to appear in my real world. The moment I recognized her name, I realized something terrifying. Maybe I wasn't simply reborn. Maybe I had been reborn inside a story. And if that was true, then the future I remembered might not be the real future anymore. For 3 days, I convinced myself I was imagining things. That had to be the explanation. After all, reincarnating once was already absurd. Being reborn inside a novel? That sounded insane even to me. Yet the evidence kept piling up. Started with a name. A simple name on a local news article.
Evelien Hart.
The moment I saw it, I nearly dropped my phone. Not because she was famous. At least not yet. At this point, she was just a 16-year-old high school student from a small town. Nobody important. Nobody powerful. Nobody worth writing about. Except I knew exactly who she was. Because in my previous life, I'd read a fantasy web novel during lunch breaks at construction sites. It was one of the few things that helped me escape reality. The novel was called Crown of Ashes, and Evelyn Hart was one of its characters. A tragic character, a genius, a future billionaire, a woman who would eventually control one of the largest technology empires in the world. But none of that mattered, because according to the story, she was supposed to die next month. I stared at the article for nearly 10 minutes. The details matched perfectly. Age, school, town, everything. My heart pounded. This couldn't be coincidence. There were billions of people in the world. The chances were impossible. Unless the world itself was different. I immediately opened my laptop. Hours passed. I searched for names, places, companies, events, one after another. Every discovery made my stomach twist. The novel's world wasn't identical to reality. But it existed. Not entirely. Not completely. More like reality and fiction had somehow merged together. Some characters existed. Others didn't. Certain companies matched. Certain events matched. And the further I researched, the more terrified I became. Because Crown of Ashes wasn't a happy story. It was a story full of betrayals. Wars. Corporate conspiracies. Murders. People destroying each other for power. The worst part? The main plot hadn't even started yet. The world still looked normal. But according to the novel, everything would begin within a few years. I leaned back in my chair. For a long time, I simply stared at the ceiling. I had already been given one impossible advantage. Knowledge from my previous life. Now I apparently possessed another. Knowledge of the future. The question was simple. What should I do with it? The selfish answer was obvious. Nothing. Stay hidden. Make money. Enjoy life. Avoid trouble. That had been my plan from the beginning. But there was one problem.
Evelien Hart.
In the novel, she died because nobody helped her. A drunk truck driver lost control during a rainstorm. Her car plunged into a river. By the time rescue workers arrived, it was too late. A minor tragedy. Barely 2 paragraphs. The story moved on. Except that death changed everything. Her future inventions never appeared. Her companies never existed. Millions of lives were affected because one talented girl died before reaching adulthood. Could I really ignore that? I wrestled with the question for days. Eventually, I lost the argument with myself. 1 week later, I convinced Charles to let me take a trip. Officially, it was educational. Unofficially, it was an attempt to interfere with fate. The town was 6 hours away. Small, quiet, forgettable. The sort of place people pass through without noticing. I arrived 2 days before the accident. The timing was intentional. Too early would attract attention. Too late might be useless. I checked into a hotel. Then waited. The entire situation felt ridiculous. What was I supposed to do? Walk up to a stranger and announce I knew she would die? I would sound insane. Probably get arrested. So I watched from a distance instead. The novel had described the accident clearly. Rainstorm, bridge, nighttime, a specific route home from a school competition. Everything matched. When the day arrived, dark clouds covered the sky. Thunder rolled overhead. Rain poured relentlessly. And for the first time since my reincarnation, I felt genuinely nervous. Maybe the future couldn't be changed. Maybe fate would correct itself. Maybe I was wasting my time. At 7:43 that evening, I saw her. A silver sedan. Exactly as described. Driving toward the bridge. My pulse accelerated. Seconds later, another vehicle appeared. A delivery truck. Moving far too fast. Just like the novel. "Come on," I muttered. The truck swerved. Its tires lost traction. Everything happened instantly. The vehicle crossed into the opposite lane. Directly toward Evelyn's car. In the novel, this was where she died. Not today. I slammed my own vehicle forward. The impact rattled every bone in my body. Metal screamed. Glass exploded. The truck struck my SUV instead. Pain shot through my shoulder. The world spun. For several moments, everything became a blur. Then silence. Rain hammered the windshield. My ears rang. I tasted blood. But I was alive. And so was she. Emergency vehicles arrived minutes later. Paramedics dragged me from the wreckage. Someone shouted. Someone else yelled for a stretcher. I remember very little after that. Only fragments. Flashing lights. Then pain. Then darkness. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Again. I was beginning to hate hospitals. My left arm was fractured. Several ribs were cracked. Nothing life-threatening. Charles looked furious. "Do you have any idea how stupid that was?" I smiled weakly. "Worked, though." He rubbed his forehead. For once, he couldn't argue. The door opened. A young girl stepped inside. Long black hair. Gray eyes. Simple clothes. She looked nervous. Very nervous.
Evelien Hart.
Alive. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she bowed deeply. "Thank you." Her voice trembled. "You saved my life." I studied her carefully. This was the girl who should have died. The girl who would eventually change the world. The girl who had no idea who she would become. "It's okay."
No.
She shook her head. "It isn't." Tears filled her eyes. "If you hadn't been there." She couldn't finish the sentence. Neither of us needed her to. A strange feeling settled over me. Relief. Genuine relief. For the first time, I had successfully changed something. Not an investment. Not a business decision. A human life. The future was no longer fixed. And that realization was both exciting and terrifying. Because if the future could change, then my knowledge became less reliable. Every decision from this point forward carried consequences. Unpredictable consequences. Evelyn visited several more times while I recovered. At first she came to express gratitude. Then she came because she enjoyed talking. Eventually she came because we had become friends. She was intelligent. Ridiculously intelligent. The sort of person who absorbed information at frightening speed. During one conversation she solved a mathematics problem that had taken me 20 minutes. In less than 30 seconds. I immediately understood why the novel called her a genius. The scary part? She wasn't even trying. A month later, after I was discharged, we stayed in contact. Mostly messages. Occasional calls. Nothing unusual. At least that's what I thought. Until one evening. Charles entered my study carrying a folder. His expression was unusually grim. "There's a problem." That got my attention immediately. "What happened?" He handed me several photographs. I looked down. My stomach hardened. The pictures showed my mother, Gregory, and 3 men I didn't recognize. They were meeting outside a restaurant. Late at night. Secretly. "Who are they?" Charles sat down. "Private investigators." I frowned. "Investigating what?" "You." The room suddenly felt colder. Charles continued. "They've been asking questions. About your inheritance. About your investments. About your daily routine." I slowly set the photographs aside. In my previous life, my mother wanted my money. That much hadn't changed. The difference was that this time she couldn't legally touch it. Apparently she wasn't willing to accept that. "What are they planning?" Charles hesitated, then spoke carefully. "We don't know yet." That answer worried me more than certainty would have. Unknown enemies were always dangerous, especially desperate ones. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then I noticed something else. One of the men looked familiar. Very familiar. I picked up the photograph again. Studied the face. A chill ran down my spine. No, that was impossible. Except it wasn't. Because I recognized him from Crown of Ashes. Not as a major character. Not even close. A minor villain. Fixer. A man who specialized in making problems disappear. The kind of person wealthy criminals hired when they wanted dirty work handled quietly. According to the novel, he eventually became involved in multiple murders, including one involving a wealthy teenager. A teenager with a large inheritance. My inheritance. For the first time since being reborn, genuine danger appeared. Not theoretical danger. Not future danger. Present danger. Someone had entered the game much earlier than they were supposed to. And somehow, that someone was connected to my mother. As I stared at the photograph, one realization became painfully clear. Changing Evelyn's fate had altered more than I realized. The timeline was shifting. Pieces were moving. Events were accelerating. And if I wasn't careful, I might not survive long enough to enjoy my second life.